What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Magicka Dragonknight. So Magicka Dragonknight kind of fits in this weird spot when it comes to both melee and range DPS and magic versus stamina DPS. Magicka Dragoknights kind of they basically have to play within melee range in order to basically get to their highest potential. But because they're playing at melee range, they're competing more with stamina spots more than they are with Magicka spots, because a lot of the Magicka classes in the game play at range, but the Magicka DK is unique in that it has to play basically at melee range. So it kind of puts it in a weird position where Magicka DKs can pull very good numbers, usually a little bit higher than that of your typical Magicka DPS, or very close to, very similar to the best Magicka DPS, but because they have to play in melee range, their parses are a little bit more comparable to that with a stamina DPS, just because stamina DPS are going to be the ones that you're going to be competing with for those melee spots in a Trials guild. So this kind of puts it in a weird position, but nonetheless, Magicka Dragonknights are actually quite fun to play, and they do boast pretty good DPS when it comes to Magicka specs, although they don't really come close to topping out compared to the stamina specs. So just like the rest of our build videos, we'll be going over gear, attributes, skills, everything you need to know in order to basically recreate this build for yourself. So we will be starting off first with our gear, and then we'll be going over skills and then CP points, and then after that we'll be talking about a rotation. Magicka Dragonknights can kind of go into a static rotation where you're going to end up overcasting a few abilities, or you can do a dynamic rotation where you will not end up overcasting abilities, gain a little bit of DPS, but because your rotation is going to be more reactive to your durations and things like that, it's a little bit more difficult to learn. Then we'll do a 6-man dummy parse so you guys can get an idea of where the Magicka DK stands compared to other DPS specs. So let's go ahead and get started first with our gear. So Zaan is going to be the strongest monster helm set for you for single target DPS on a Magicka DK. It basically, because you have to play within melee range, Zaan is pretty much always going to be active. The only instance where you might not want to use Zaan is if the boss or you need to be pretty mobile. So for example, against Saint Felms in Asylum, if you're fighting him one-on-one outside of the Olms fight, then Zaan isn't going to be quite as useful because Felms teleports around a lot. In those instances, you might want to be running something like Siroria instead. The other thing with Zaan is it is a single target set here, so it only affects one enemy. If you need a little bit of additional cleave damage, then you can go with Grothdarr instead. Grothdarr does have a nice AoE around it, so it does give you a little bit more cleave damage, but you are sacrificing some single target DPS when you do it. So what I like to do is I like to swap out between Grothdarr and Zaan depending on whether I have to clear trash or if it's a boss fight. Single target's going to be more important for boss fights. Obviously the cleave is going to be more important for trash fights. For our first armor set, so you can pretty much divide sets into a body set, basically a set that's active at all times no matter what bar you are on, and a front bar set. So this is a set that is only active while you are on your front bar compared to on your back bar. So we will be going over a couple of different gear combinations that you can use, both for people who have access to certain DLCs and expansions, as well as gear that you might not have access, gear you can use if you don't have access to those expansions. So for example, Siroria here is going to be the strongest set that you can wear on your body right now, just because of that enormous 600 spell damage if you can get the full buff from Siroria. I had the perfected version here. You can go with the imperfect version. The perfected version comes from veteran Cloud Rest, but the imperfect version can be farmed pretty easily on normal Cloud Rest. The difference is that 5-piece max Magicka bonus. So because you have to farm Cloud Rest for this set, you need to have access to Somerset Isle, so you need to have Somerset expansion in order to get this set here. And again, like I mentioned earlier, we'll be going over some gear substitutions that you can make if you don't have access to Somerset. For our front bar set, we have Spell Strategist. Spell Strategist is a new set that was released in Murkmire. It is a PvP set that you can get from Rewards of the Worthy. So because of that, you can actually buy this off of Guild Traders. So don't feel like you have to farm Spell Strategist. You don't have to go farm BGs or go into Cyrodiil at all. You can just buy this off of Guild Traders if you would like. So you would be running this on your front bar. So we do have a front bar Inferno staff here of Spell Strategist infused with a flame damage enchant, and then a back bar we're still sticking with Maelstrom Inferno staff infused, this time with an absorb Magicka enchant to help out with our sustain a little bit here. We did see a little bit of a sustain hit, and Mag DKs have always traditionally been a little bit tougher to sustain on just because they don't really have the same bonuses to sustain that, for example, a Magicka Nightblade or a Templar does, so we do need that additional Absorb Magicka enchant here. In a good group with Worm and Orb support, you might be able to sustain without this enchant, in which case you might want to swap this out with either a weapon damage enchant or a shock damage enchant. So those are going to be your two alternative options if you don't want to run an Absorb Magicka enchant here. For jewelry traits and enchants, we have 3 spell damage and 3 bloodthirsty. You can kind of mix things up with your traits. You can go with Arcane if you would like to have a little bit more larger resource pool, or you can go with Infused to boost up your enchants. Tabata did a very nice article kind of explaining the differences, or I should say mathematically explaining the differences between Arcane and Infused for Magicka DPS as well as Stamina DPS, now that they've changed Minor Sorcery and Minor Brutality up to 10% rather than the original 5%. So Infused does win out compared to Arcane now. So if 3 Infused or 3 Arcane or 3 Bloodthirsty, or you can go with one of each, doesn't really matter what kind of combination you go with, they're all equally powerful combinations here. Technically speaking, 3 Bloodthirsty is going to give you the greatest amount of DPS, but it is going to be varying depending on your group, as how many Bloodthirsties you have in group and things like that. So for a safe bet, you can go with 3 Arcane. If you want to get a little bit more DPS, you can go with 3 Infused instead. But like I said, you can really go with any combination that you decide to go with. Now, armored traits and enchants. So we're going with divines on our small pieces with max magicka enchants, and then infused. I have divines here, but these can be infused or divines on your large pieces here, as long as you have the max magicka enchant on your large piece. So for example, because our Zaan doesn't have a health bonus as the one piece, unlike Siroria, we do need to have a max health enchant just so our health is at an appropriate level for vet trials, and because it's a health enchant, we have to go with divines and not infused. Otherwise your chest and your legs should be infused or divines. The difference is pretty minimal between the two of them. Now if you don't have access to the Somerset DLC, or it's an expansion, then you do have some other gear options here. So one of the first gear options is going to be Burning Spellweave. So this is a dropped set from City of Ash, so you do need to farm it because it only comes from dungeons. It's a light armor set, so you can wear it on the body, or you can have it on the front bar because it is a proc set. So you could go with something like Spell Strategist on your body and then Burning Spellweave front bar, or vice versa if you don't have access to Somerset at all. Another set that I do want to mention here that you could run until you manage to get Burning Spellweave is going to be, if I can find it here, or maybe I already pulled it out. Okay, looks like I did pull it out already, and that's going to be, where is it? Silks of the Sun. So Silks of the Sun is a drop set from Stonefalls, so you can buy this off of guild traders. So if you don't want to farm for Burning Spellweave, you can go with Silks of the Sun. Now because the 5-piece is a static bonus, you do want to have this on your body. You don't want to necessarily swap it out with a front bar Inferno Staff or anything like that. The other thing too is that the spell damage that you get from the 5-piece, because it is only boosting a subset of your damage, it actually isn't affected at all by major and minor sorcery or any other sort of spell damage percentage boosts. So it is going to be a little bit weaker because it's going to be flat 400 rather than 400 multiplied by all your spell damage boosts, but it's still a very strong set to have there. The other thing that sucks with Silks of the Sun is that 2-piece does give you max health, which is kind of an advantage. You don't have to run a health enchant at all. You can go and run with all Magicka enchants if you would like, so it's not that big of a deal, but it is something that you do want to consider because you're basically losing one set bonus if you're running Silks of the Sun. One other set that you can run until you get to farm all the sets that you need from like Burning Spellweave or Spell Strategist or Siroria, it's going to be Mother's Sorrow. Very similar to Silks of the Sun, this is a dropped set from Deshawn, so you can buy it off of guild traders. Just adds a crap ton of spell crit. Now, Dragonites, unlike Templars and Nightblades, do not have any additional crit damage, so this is going to be a little bit weaker compared to if you use it on a Magplar or a Magicka Nightblade, but it's still a pretty powerful set nonetheless. Just like Silks of the Sun, it is a static bonus, so you might want to consider buying this as your body rather than a front bar set. But you can run this as front bar set, very similar to how you could run front bar set with Silks of the Sun, but you will be losing some power when you swap to your back bar, and because Mag DKs are on your back bar for a little bit more often than some other classes depending on your rotation, it might not be worth running a front bar Mother Sorrow set. The final set that I want to mention here that I don't actually have right now is going to be Julianos. Julianos is a crafted set from Grothdarr, so you can ask somebody to craft it for you, or you can buy it off of Guild Traders. It's up to you. It's a very simple set, very easy to obtain, and also still pretty strong. It's not going to be quite as strong as something like Burning Spellweave or Siroria or Spell Strategist, but it'll get the job done until you're able to get those sets put together. One final set I do want to mention that some people like to bring up is going to be Elfbane. So Elfbane is a heavy armor set that is dropped from Blastarius in Cyrodiil. So you have to buy the little random armor pieces from Blastarius using AP and hope that you get the sets here. Now it is a heavy armor set, so you will need to run 3 pieces of jewelry and then 2 armor pieces. The 5-piece is a static bonus to basically boost the duration of your flame damage abilities by 2 seconds, so you don't want it on your front bar, you want it on your body at all times. The disadvantage of running Elfbane is that if you're going to be running Siroria, you have to put it on your front bar, so you kind of have to control the proc there. And the second thing is you will not be able to run 5-1-1. You'll have to run 5-2. 5 light, 2 heavy if you're running Elfbane. So you will be giving up a little bit of max resources that way, but it does give you a little bit more of a duration on your flame damage abilities, and it also affects Zaan, and Zaan does tick harder the longer it is out, so it is a pretty decent boost to DPS, but overall the sacrifices that you have to make to use Elfbane might not necessarily be worth doing something like running Burning Spellweave and Spell Strategist. So that's something that you do want to consider if you are going to be considering running Elfbane. So those are all kind of your armor options there. Now let's go over our character sheet. So Dark Elves are going to be the best race option for Dragonites by and far because they get the largest boost to flame damage, and pretty much all of our damage, I should say probably close to 95% of our damage is flame damage as a Dragonite. So definitely want to be a Dark Elf here. You could go with a High Elf if you'd like. High Elves get 4% flame damage, but Dark Elves get that 7% flame damage, so it's going to be a little bit better to be a Dark Elf. You can also go with Breton if you would like. It's kind of up to you. Bretons don't really get any kind of boost to elemental damage. They do get 10% max Magicka as well as a nice boost to their spell resistance. So in terms of survivability, Bretons do top out, but in terms of just raw performing DPS, Dark Elves are going to be the strongest race. For our attribute points, we have 64 points into Magicka here. That does leave us with 16.6k health, just barely enough to scrape by for vet trials. If you'd like, you can shift some points from Magicka into health if you would like. Dragonites are a little bit tankier compared to the other classes just because they do have innate additional spell resistance boost, so don't necessarily need to run extra points into health if you don't like to, but it is an option if you would like. So for our Munda Stone, I have the Apprentice here, but you can run the Thief if you would like. It's kind of up to you. It's really dependent on kind of your own playstyle and your own personal preference. So you can go with either the Apprentice or the Thief. I was just testing things out and I decided, oh, I'll just stick with the Apprentice because the DPS difference between the Apprentice and the Thief is pretty minimal at best. For food, we're going with Clockwork, Citrus, Filet. Mag Decays, like I mentioned earlier, do have some sustain issues, so we do need the additional regen from Clockwork, Citrus, Filet here to help us out. Can go with Witchmother's Potent Brew if you don't have the means to obtain Clockwork, Citrus, Filet. It is fairly expensive to get because it does use Perfect Row, so you can use Witchmother's Potent Brew if you don't have this. Like I mentioned earlier, you could realistically you might be able to sustain a full light attack rotation if you have Worm and good orb support without that absorb Magicka enchant. So you could run blue food if you would like, but I personally would not recommend doing so just because Mag Decays generally don't have the same level of sustain as Templars, Wardens, and Nightblades, so I don't recommend running blue food, but if you would like, that is an option that you might want to consider. Now for our skills, starting off with our front bar here, we have Molten, Whip, Burning Embers, Engulfing Flames, Elemental Drain. So this is just here for the parse, but this will be where you have your shield here, so you can go with Dampen Magic or Harness Magicka. I personally prefer Dampen for the larger shield bonus, but it's up to you. Harness does have give you a little bit of sustain, but it is reliant on you, 1, taking damage, and 2, having that damage be spell damage. So I just like to have that larger shield here for the additional survivability. Then we have Inner Light and Fiery Rage. For our back bar, we have Flames of Oblivion, Eruption, Blockade of Fire, Rearming Trap. So you can replace Rearming Trap with Channel Acceleration if you would like, but because you will basically be playing at melee range at all times, Rearming Trap's going to be better just because it uses your secondary resource compared to Magicka. So it uses stamina basically, so that just helps out your sustain a little bit compared to running Channel Acceleration. Channel Acceleration does end up eating a little bit into your sustain, so that's just something that you're going to want to bear in mind. Then we have Balance or Spell Sim if you would like the additional sustain bonus. Like I mentioned earlier, Magicka's sustain ain't so hot, so you might want to run this. If you don't want to run this though, you can replace this with something like Inner Light instead. And then Standard of Might. This is going to be one of our primary damage ultimates versus Fiery Rage. Fire Rage, while it is pretty strong and it does have some nice cleave, it doesn't do as much damage as Standard of Might. Standard of Might also increases the damage you do by 15%, so that's really a really nice buff there. However, Standard, basically you have to stay still during this entire duration, so it's 17 seconds, which might be not very possible depending on the fight, versus Fiery Rage, which only lasts for 7 seconds. So if it's a fight where you know the boss is not gonna be able to stay within your standard radius for 17 seconds, you might want to drop Fiery Rage instead of a standard. Now going over our champion points, the CP cap is 810, which gives us 270 points to put across each of the 3 different constellation types. Starting off with our green CPs, we have 75 into Arcanist and 75 into Tenacity here, which leaves 120 points to put into the remaining nodes, really however you'd like. So I have 40 Tumbling, 40 Shadow Ward, 40 Warlord, 40 Shadow Ward, but like I mentioned earlier, you can kind of play around with the distribution however you'd like. It's kind of up to you where you want to put them. For our blue CPs, I want to mention here that this is kind of optimized around a fully optimized raid group, so basically that assumes very good Alkosh uptimes, very good Infused Torx Crusher uptimes, and we also have Minor Breach coming from a Stamplar running Power of the Light. So if you don't have good uptimes, or you don't have a Stamplar for instance, you might need to shift some points out of a couple of these nodes and put them into Spell Erosion if you'd like. I would generally start off with Staff Expert, that gives you 9 points back, and then take 5 points out of Master at Arms, drop it to 61, that gives you 14 points, which bumps this up to 40. You shouldn't need much more than 40 to 45, but generally speaking, that's kind of a good max value you want to hit with Spell Erosion, but really it depends on your group. So if you're losing out on Alkosh, you don't have Torx Infused Crusher, you might need to push Spell Erosion even higher. So just give and take depending on how much you need to put into Spell Erosion. Finally, for our red CPs, I take a one-size-fits-most approach when it comes to red CPs. So basically what this means is that while you will not necessarily get the best damage mitigation for any single piece of content, you will have very good damage mitigation across all the pieces of content. So if you want to maximize mitigation, you will need to shift some points around. 81 to Ironclad, 61 to Thick Skin, and 64 into Hardy and Elemental Defender. Now, I did take out some points from Quick Recovery to show you this particular setup, but the other setup that I had was 66 Ironclad, 66 Thick Skin, 64 Hardy Elemental Defender, and then 10 points into Quick Recovery for the Field Physician passive. For progression style guilds, you might want to consider taking this just because it reduces damage that you take while you're resurrecting another player, which does help in progression style runs, but it's kind of up to you if you want to take it or not. If you have a Magplar group, they'll typically be doing the resurrecting or even a Stamplar, so you might not necessarily need to pick up this passive here. Alright, so that's pretty much it for all the build information. So now let's go ahead and talk about our rotation. So I'll just demonstrate on this dummy off to the side here. So Magicka DKs typically run a dynamic rotation, though you can make it static if you would like. And that's mainly because our durations here don't really line up very well. 15, 18, 8, so you can basically double this to be 16. And then you have 10, 10, and then this is your spamble here. So your durations don't really line up very well, as you also have to consider trap, which is 6-second duration twice, so 12 seconds. Doesn't line up very well. Like I said, you could do static rotation if you would like, but then you end up overcasting some of your abilities, which usually ends up eating into your sustain a little bit more and costs you a little bit more a little bit of DPS. So most Mag DKs run what's called a dynamic rotation. So basically you keep an eye on your dots through something like Strendar or Action Duration Reminder or some other UI element add-on, and then you basically re-up your dots when they run out. So typically speaking, this is kind of what you're going to start off with. Your back bar rotation is going to be pretty simple, just lay down your dots, and then front bar here, you just want to, again, keep maintaining your dots. One very important dot to keep up is going to be Engulfing Flames because of that debuff that it provides, 10% more damage from all fire damage debuff. It's a pretty strong debuff to have, especially in a raid group with all your Magicka Nightblades, Magicka DPS in general running a lot of fire damage compared to where they used to be. So just try to maintain this as best you can. So I'll try to give you guys an example of a dynamic rotation here. So you'll see I do reapply Blockade here. So I do want to let my dots completely run out before I reapply them. Otherwise you do what's called overcasting. And what that basically is you basically cast the ability before the duration actually expires. So why does this matter? Why do you want to avoid overcasting? Well, you want to avoid overcasting Flames of Oblivion because if you guys see the fireball that shoots out, it shoots out at set intervals. It's every 5 seconds. So when we first activate it, it shoots out 1 fireball, and then again when the countdown reaches 10, and then again at 5, and then it'll actually shoot out 1 more when the counter hits 0. So it's actually 4 hits spaced out over 15 seconds here. Now if you end up, let's see here, that's the last hit right there. If you end up overcasting it, so if you basically hit it at 2 or 3 seconds compared to the last second, you do miss out on that last hit there. So if I were to overcast it, yes, I do get it a hit right when I cast it, but at the same time I did miss out on that 4th hit, so I just want to avoid overcasting Flames of Oblivion that way. And then obviously if you're overcasting something, that means you're casting it before the duration is completely expired. So in terms of a pure damage over Magicka used, you end up kind of decreasing the amount of that ratio. So you do end up basically eating a little bit into your sustain if you overcast your abilities. So that's why dynamic rotation will generally be a little bit better for you in terms of sustain. It is going to be a little bit more difficult because you just have to maintain and be aware of what dots are running and when they run out. But generally speaking, it's going to be an easier time for you for sustain, as well as gives generally dynamic rotation is going to be a little bit better just because you're basically maximizing the amount of dots uptime that you have that way. So because of that, there really isn't necessarily what I call a set rotation for a mag decay. Now there is a static rotation that you can run here. So static rotation is pretty simple. So here's the static rotation here, and it's basically done in, basically you can think of it as 2 parts. Then you reapply Blockade. There is a little bit of dynamicism behind the static rotation, but it is pretty simple. So basically what you want to do is you want to reapply Blockade every time it goes down, and then every second time you apply Blockade, you're going to use Eruption and Flames of Oblivion. You can put down Trap either every other time or every time. If you do it every time, you'll overcast Trap, but you'll maintain 100% uptime on Minor Force. If you cast it every other, you will have downtime on Minor Force. So generally speaking, you'll be casting it every time you're on your back bar compared to every other time you're on your back bar. So basically you can think of it as split up into your back bar rotation, so Blockade, Eruption, Flames of Oblivion, swap to your front bar, Engulfing Flames, Burning Embers, Whip. Then you do your back bar, reapply Blockade, go back to your front bar, and then you basically repeat the cycle all over again. And then Trap is going to be every time you lay down your Blockade. Eruption is every other. Flames of Oblivion is every other. Now, there is still some dynamicism behind this because your Engulfing Flames and Burning Embers last 10 seconds, so it doesn't quite fit very nicely into the rotation. So generally speaking, what I do is when there's about 3 or 2 seconds left on Blockade, I just re-up Engulfing, re-up Burning Embers, so that way I have that debuff up while I'm on my back bar, regardless of whether I'm just applying Blockade or if I'm applying Blockade, Eruption, and Flames of Oblivion. Like I mentioned, this is going to be harder on your sustain because you are going to be overcasting, and you're going to have a little bit less DPS compared to a dynamic rotation, but it does simplify the rotation a little bit there. I would recommend picking up and starting with a dynamic rotation just because going from a static to a dynamic rotation does have a little bit of a transition period, and that transition period can be quite difficult to kind of break out of your static rotation that way. So now that we've kind of talked about a rotation, let's actually see it in action in a full 6-summon dummy Parse, so you guys can get an idea of where this build stands and where mag decays stand. Now, like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, because you are in melee range, you're kind of split the difference between stamina and magic DPS. So this particular Parse, I personally compare to stamina DPS just because we are within melee range. However, you can make an argument that this is also comparable to Magicka DPS because you are using Magicka as your primary resource here, and stamina and Magicka DPS do have different levels of buffs. Their damage, they have different max Magicka versus max stamina modifiers versus weapon damage versus spell damage modifiers. So me personally, while I look at the Parse in total and compare that to a stamina DPS when I want to take a look at whether to take a mag decay into a raid, the parse itself is actually going to be more representative of Magicka. So I would say compare this to both Magicka and Stamina, but for different reasons. Magicka, so that you can see where it stands compared to other Magicka similarly buffed classes, and compared to Stamina if you kind of want to look at the pure raw potential and where it will be in a raid in that melee spot. So let's go ahead and just do this parse here, and we'll take a look at combat metrics when we are done. So in terms of ultimate, I like to use standard like I mentioned. So you want to make the most out of your standard duration because it does boost your damage done by 15%. So you do want all your dots ticking so that way you have multiple dots running when your standard is up. That just helps maximize the amount of damage, bonus damage that you're getting out of your standard. So remember, this is going to be a dynamic rotation. So you'll see sometimes we'll have a lot of time to use a lot of whips like I did there, and other times we won't really have that much just because we'll end up where we are just reapplying so many dots. There's really no time for us to do any appreciable number of spambles. Make sure we have Blockade down for the Maelstrom bonus there. So remember, we do want all of our dots ticking, and then we lay down our standard. Oh, I just realized I am actually hitting that other dummy that we were using earlier with where I'm putting my standard. So that's going to be a little bit of an issue, but we should be able to get just this dummy's report in our combat metrics. So this shouldn't be a big deal that we did manage to hit that dummy out there. Alright, so there we go. That is our parse. Like I said, we did end up hitting this dummy here with our standard, so we just have to wait to get out of combat with this dummy. Then we can take a look at our combat metrics report. So it's not going to get us out of combat for a little bit here. And then we'll take a look at our combat metrics. Alright, so there we go. So our actual DPS... Oh no, actually... You know what, we're going to have to do that parse again, I just realized, because our duration is actually, combat duration is actually a little bit longer. So we will do another parse here, because it shouldn't be as low as 42.8k, it should be actually a little bit higher, so we will do the parse again, so apologies, but this will kind of give you a little bit more time to kind of digest the dynamic rotation that a Magicka has to do. And this time I'll be a little bit more mindful of where I put my standard. I'll actually probably just move this dummy out of the way so it's not getting hit by the standard. I think that's what ended up causing our little DPS discrepancy issue there. Let's go ahead and move you out over here so you're not getting hit. And then we can reset these dummies. So that way we can do our parse again. So just bear with me while we do another parse. I just want to give you guys the most accurate results here. So if you guys want to compare this parse to the other parse that I did earlier, their screwed up parse, you'll notice that our rotation is definitely going to be very different. Again, this is a dynamic rotation. So this necessarily means we're going to have a different rotation. If I were to write out this rotation for you guys, this would probably be several dozen steps. Actually cast that one a little bit early. So action duration reminder, just want to mention this right now. It's kind of weird with Burning Embers in that it actually counts a Ardent Flame passive under the timer. So that's why it kind of jumps randomly up to 4. Because it is using the timer for that passive. So you can kind of see now that our DPS shouldn't actually have been that 42.8 that you saw earlier. Alright, so there we go. That is our actual DPS here, which is going to be 46.7k. That's a lot closer to what I've been pulling during a couple of set tests here. So you can see here, we are doing very well. We're doing a little bit less than our Magplar or Magicka Nightblades. I have managed to hit 47k before on a Mag DK, so that's just something that you kind of want to keep in mind here, is that my Nightblades do have Minor Berserk, so if we did add Minor Berserk here, we would actually be pulling pretty similar to Magicka Nightblades, maybe just a hair shy of what they're able to pull here. But again, because we're playing at melee range, it might not necessarily be a fair comparison to compare this to a Magicka Nightblade. It might be better to compare this to a Stamina Nightblade instead. So just going over our combat metrics parse real quick here. Light attacks are going to be disproportionately representative, just because we are, in a static testing environment. We don't have to play mechanics or anything, so we're able to weave very well here. But so light attacks do make up a very good proportion of our DPS, so regardless of whether or not you're doing a dummy parse or a raid parse, it will be within the top 5 contributors to your DPS. Eruption, ever since the buff, is making up quite a bit of DPS here. We did end up getting a little bit lower spell crit than we actually have. Our mean is 42.8 and we got 37% as our crits. And then Zaan is a very powerful set here. So this Flames of Oblivion kind of showcases why you don't want to lose that 4th fireball, just because the average hit is 13k, so you'll actually see lower hits here if you do a static rotation and end up overcasting Flames of Oblivion. So that's just something, it just kind of re-emphasizes why you don't want to recast Flames of Oblivion there, and why a dynamic rotation will fit you better. That Absorb Magicka enchant here does provide some nice sustain. It gives us an additional 180 sustain effectively in regen. And you can see here from the difference between regen and drain, it's 220 or so. And we used balance 5 times during that parse. So Mag DKs do have some sustain problems still, even now. So just something you want to keep in mind here. So that's it for this build video. Let me know down in the comment section below if you guys have any questions. Again, apologies for that botched parse, first parse, but the second parse is a little bit more representative, and I did want to give you guys an actual representative parse of a Mag DK. So I hope you guys found this video informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.